copy of the Simple Cookbook for Antique Cakes. I put that together. That is from, most of it is from the Buckeye Cookery and Practical Housekeeping. These homemaking manuals and guides were extremely popular. We had a lot of people, for the first time, we had a lot of young women who were living further away from their families. We had more mobility among the classes. We had more wealth, more individual homes. A lot of women didn't know how to keep a home the way we would think. And so there were a lot of manuals written, a lot of etiquette manuals. And this is one in particular, again, I'm just checking the name, the Buckeye Cookery and Practical Homemaking. That's from Ohio, as you can probably tell. But there were lots of them. And so these two recipes, I focused on just the basic ones. They're both ladies' cakes. One is what we would call a white cake, one is what we would call a yellow cake. Difference is very simple. One has egg yolks, one has egg whites. And that changes the consistency of the cake and so on. The white cake is more of a sponge cake, more, it's closer to an angel food cake, but it is not angel food. That's, again, a little different. We're gonna make a yellow cake. And the yellow cake is it's a butter cake because it has, again, the butter in it. And it's a more savory cake. For today's recipe, we will be using flour, sugar, butter, milk, baking soda and cream of tartar, 4 egg yolks, and vanilla. Tools of the trade. A lot of this you're going to recognize. These things haven't changed very much. I'm not going to use it today, but the cake sifter. And still have that?
Yes, we do.
Yep. So this is where I would ask my college students, what is a cake sifter for? What the flour sifter is for? And my college students, they would be a little hard pressed to figure it out. So I'm guessing you have a better idea.
Yes, we do. We use them.
Yes, I still have one in my house.
Yes.
I don't use them that much.
Right, yeah, but we all had them.
We don't need to use them as much anymore because our flours come pre-sifted, it's not as compacted, and it's, let us say, cleaner. One of the reasons you would sift flour is little friends would occasionally find their way in. Yep. So you want to sift it to make sure that it's light, fluffy, no little friends riding along. So, all right, and then one of the things that's interesting is the 1880s, 1890s is when we start to see these 3 guys pop up. And this is the baking powder, cream of tartar, and baking soda. Before that, cakes were lifted using either whipped egg whites or using yeast, same as bread. And most breads at that time too were also a sourdough. So cake itself is a sourdough. If you go back to those old receipts, as you were saying, you'll see sometimes the recipe for a cake will say 1 cup of yeast. Well, we're not talking 1 cup of Fleischmann's yeast. We're talking 1 cup of sourdough starter. And that is how you would lift it. So come the 1880s, we begin to see this in cookbooks very often. These are used to chemically lift the cakes, make them lighter, make them airier. We have our baking powder, cream of tartar, and baking soda. And the cream of tartar, before that we would see pearl ash used, which you would make yourself by burning very hard woods and keeping the ash from that wood. You would also see, now of course the name goes out of my mind. It's related to cream of tartar, and it is the residue left over from inside wine barrels. And you would use that residue as part of your ingredients to help lift. And those items, the pearl ash, that residue, later become what we're familiar with baking soda. Baking soda is a type of salt, and then the cream of tartar and the baking powder.
So what's right now, what's the difference in terms of outcome between the baking powder and the cream of tartar?
Baking powder is made using cream of tartar.
Okay, so
So-
essentially, at
It's,
some point they're the same.
at some point, they're very similar, they're the same. This is an ingredient in this,
Yeah.
and they react to the acids. Very often, that's why you see baking soda and baking powder together, and you'll see, if it's just baking powder, you'll see something that's very acidic added, like buttermilk. In the white cake, we have buttermilk being used because of the acid reaction helps to lift the cake, in addition to the very stiffly beaten egg whites. All right, so let's just bake a cake. So we'll begin. I brought the butter pre-measured. Figured that would be a little bit easier. So our first item, we're going to want to get our butter in, get that creamed up along with our sugar. So we're putting in a 1/4 cup of butter. Now, it was recommended to mix your cakes in earthenware bowls rather than in tin. And tin was used for baking, for the baking pans, for your utensils, but not necessarily, it was recommended to use earthenware for mixing up your breads, your cakes. So we'll get that together. So we're putting in, excuse me, 1/2 cup of butter, not 1/4 cup. 1/2 cup went in.
That was a little too
Yeah.
much.
Yes, I have it pre-measured. It is pre-measured.
Yeah.
So, and actually, you can correct me. What's the first thing you really should be doing? Grease and flour your pans.
Oh, yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely, yes.
So, is there anyone who feels like playing a little bit of lard?
That's what they use.
That's what they use.
And it worked.
Yes, it did. And many cooks still prefer to use lard.
Yeah, well, our lard, when I was growing up, all came from our household animal. Not household animal, but the farm animal.
Yeah, from the hogs you raise.
Oh, yeah, which we helped make into lard ourselves. Yes.
Well, shortening did not come around until after 1900. And so everything was baked with, no, everything was baked with lard.
Tar sauce.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then that became the
Yeah,
soap.
yeah.
Little line and so.
Yeah.
Crisco had a wonderful marketing plan, and Crisco very quickly replaced lard. And when from the 1940s, we have shortages, Crisco is there to step in. And come the 1960s, when we have the health movements, the idea that, we can have shortening without it coming from an animal, Crisco was happy to step in again. So we had a lot of Crisco. And come to find out, Crisco is what we call a trans fat. It is, yep. And so the lard is healthier than the Crisco. So for 100 years of good marketing, Crisco was trying to convince us they were it. And it turns out that no, the lard that you were making, that was what we should have stayed with. Now,
My grandmother, who cooked with that lard, lived to be 102. Never spent a day in the hospital.
there you go. Well, hogs, their skin is very similar to humans. And so hogs that are outside in pasture, they produce vitamin D just like we do. And that is one of the items that is transferred in the lard and in the pork fats. That's one of the few sources other than sunlight that we can receive vitamin D directly from. So again, it had a lot of benefits, it still does. So for our friends and neighbors who can't have pork products, very often they will use chicken fat. That's something that they can have, and they will use very similar to how we would use lard. Now, I'm not sure I'm up to baking a cake using chicken fat,
No.
but my best friend's grandmother did, so, you know, everybody has their own way of doing that. So, but going back to our half a cup of butter. So to that, we want to cream the butter. And creaming is the term, again, you're familiar with it, is when we make something soft and creamy, a little bit lighter, a little bit more pliable, that's the word I'm looking for. So, and I have fresh butter, you can see the water and the milk running out of my butter. So you want fresh butter, you want it soft. Now, one of the things that their butter could often be very salty because that was how it was preserved. And so they would suggest taking the butter while still cold and rinsing it again in the water to desalt it as much as possible. You don't want your cake to be too salty, and the salt can also interfere with the chemical reactions. And that, you'll see that often in recipes to use unsalted butter. Unsalted butter has a slightly different taste if you're used to only salted butter, and it doesn't last as long. So fresh unsalted butter will only last about a week in your fridge. Salted butter will last much longer. And if you get your butter fresh from a creamery, our creamery comes from a Maryland one, South Mountain Creamery. Our butter comes from there, and it will last for a couple weeks. Now, if you get your butter from Giant in a stick unknown origin, it may last a few months. And again, it has to do with how has that been processed. So to our nice and creamy butter, we're going to add our sugar. So 1 cup of sugar. One of the things we see in the 1880s and 1890s is the standardization of recipes. And with that came standardization of how much is 1 cup. Today we measure 1 cup at 8 ounces. It used to be 1 cup could also equal 6 ounces because that's a coffee cup. That's the smaller coffee cup. Could be 4 ounces because again that would be almost a teacup size. So some of the older recipes, in going backwards and looking at them, what did she mean by 1 cup? Because 1 cup could be Fanny Farmer 1 cup, and 1 cup could be, I'm going to borrow this. Now this actually might equal 1 cup, but it could be my teacup, my coffee cup. So we'll add our 1 cup of sugar. Now, one of the things when experimenting with these cake recipes is there were several cakes baked. We realized that the cakes are sweeter, a little bit sweeter. There's more sugar used than what we're used to. And I'm not quite sure of the reasoning from practice. It may simply be that our taste changed. Sugar helps things to caramelize, helps it to lift, it makes it moist, in addition to the sweetness. So, if someone would like to come and help me cream the butter and sugar together. All right, if you would like to mix this, we'll replace the eggs. Keep mixing that until it's soft and creamy, all combined.
That needs to work.
I do my best. So while I put into work, I'm going to mix up we're going to do the powders. So we're going to do our, flour. It is the heat. I think it is the heat today. So we're going to do 1.5 cups of flour. Now I'm going gonna do a little bit of a cheat that the home ec teacher says you should not do. I'm just going to lump it in very gently. Now you should, when you have a big open container, doing your flour, as you know, mounting it just a little bit over the top and then smoothing it off. So I'm gonna do a little bit of cheat. My home ec teacher, she's not here, don't tell on me. So that's 1 cup. Now cake was one of those things, we've heard the expression, I was so excited you were coming, I baked a cake. Cake was special because it takes more work. It doesn't have multiple uses. Bread you can use in many ways. Biscuits you can use in many ways. Cake, it's a celebration. So you would get those, this is where we get the tradition of the birthday cake, the visiting cake, election day cake. I've seen several recipes for election day cake. It was a holiday. Perhaps it will be again.
Yeah.
So we have our flour. Now we need 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And again, Fannie Farmer brought us in standardizing of teaspoons.
I have those too.
I'm sure. I'm sure. They have not changed. They have not changed. I looked at several examples of antique teaspoons, measuring spoons. Other than being aluminum and very flexible, so I have to be careful of them, these are not any different than what I had in my first apartment. So 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Thank you, thank you.
You're hired. You know his mama raised him right, but we already knew that.
I've done a little work, yes. Done a little work in the kitchen.
That's good. Every man should know how to cook. Cream and tartar. My dad's, my parents are going to see this. My father's class was the first group of boys who had to take home ec.
Ah.
And there was a big to-do about boys taking home ec and it being required. Well, they had a gentleman teach the home ec class, and he was brilliant. He said to these 7th, 8th grade boys, I am going to teach you how to look spiffy for your date. I am going to teach you how to plan for your date. I am going to teach you how to make a nice meal for your date. I am going to teach you to make sure that your clothes are all prepared. And so this is how he taught sewing and cooking and housekeeping to a group of 7th grade boys in the 1950s. That this is how you are a gentleman and can present yourself as a gentleman to the very pretty girl in your math class. And he said that it was a hit, and the next year they had co-ed home ec. All right, so that's our 2 teaspoons of cream and tartar. We'll give them a little bit of a fluff. Just so that's all mixed. All right, and then the last thing we gotta prep is our egg yolks, well, our milk and our egg yolks. So let's do the milk. And it calls for 1/2 cup of milk and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Now the difference in looking at the cake recipes, the yellow cake calls for 1/2 cup of sweet milk. And the white cake calls for 1/2 cup of buttermilk. The original recipe doesn't say buttermilk or sour milk. I had to go back through several other recipes after the first test cake. It didn't come out quite the way it should have. And I came across the reference, that sponge cakes, which is what the ladies' cake is, do better with sour milk, and that helps it react. And somewhere when I was reading that, I was talking with my mother about why this cake didn't work. It dawned on me again, that chemical reaction of having the cream of tartar, the baking powder, and the acid in the buttermilk. Because buttermilk, you would let your cream sit, and it would naturally culture, which sours it, creating that acid. The sweet milk is the fresh, unsoured milks. And that was why my first cake didn't work. I was missing the acid component. In her original recipe, if you take a look on the back page, is the original recipe. Miss Carola, she doesn't tell me that it is soured milk that I needed. And so I had to work that out. And again, these are things that you just know. When you grow up doing this, you just know. And so learning that and figuring that out is part of the adventure. So this is 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And then, because this is one of the areas you can be flexible, baking is all chemistry, so you can't always be flexible. I'm putting in another one because I like vanilla. Now my vanilla, as you can see in my beautiful little jars, this is both homemade vanilla and homemade almond, and very common. You would make most of your own extracts, or you would go to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist would have extracts made up for you. A lot of the things that we think of that are baking, you would have picked this up at the pharmacy.
Oh, yes.
Or the drugstore, however it was called in your neighborhood. You can make almond extract and vanilla extract, or a lot of the other types of flavorings that we would use. You need a solvent. Very commonly, that's going to be a white rum. It's going to be vodka. It's going to be some other spirit like that. You want something that is close to what you would say 100 proof. And you're using that to extract the essence, the flavors, the oils. It dissolves those in the almonds, in the vanilla bean, in chocolate nibs. I have a chocolate extract. I've done this with the mint in our garden. And so you would do this a couple times a year, and every housewife, she could keep this on hand and do a lot of flavoring. Very easy, very cheap, and very accessible. And
So
that,
you said to be a solvent
a solvent,
plus vanilla bean
the vanilla bean,
over time.
over time. A minimum of 1 week, depending on what you're using. Now with vanilla, you want about 3 months. I have found 3 months gives a really nice flavor. Almonds also about 3 months. Ground spices are about 2 weeks to 1 month, a ground spice. A whole spice, definitely longer than a month. Again, you might be looking at 3 months depending on how hard that spice is and how much it has to soak through. I have pumpkin spice is very popular. In about 3 minutes, you're going to see everything turn pumpkin spice since we've now passed the 4th of July. You can make your own pumpkin spice or your own pumpkin spice extract by taking the components that would be in it: the cinnamon, the nutmeg, the allspice, cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice. I'm missing something, I know I am.
Clove.
Clove, thank you. Combine all of that into your jar, crack it. You don't necessarily need it completely ground to a powder, but cracked so there's more surface area. And add the solvent, if it is again the white rum or the vodka, and do that and let it soak. If you did that now, being July, by the time you want it in October, it will be ready. And a teaspoon of that into your coffee, and you've got Dunkin' Donuts beat. All right, so we've got our milk is ready, our flour is ready. We have beautifully creamed butter. So we just need to play with some eggs. So I'm going to make a mess. All right, we need 4 egg yolks. Now one of the reasons I put the white and yellow cakes together is one calls for 6 egg whites and one calls for 4 egg yolks. And most of the cookbooks you will see these put together for that reason. You would make them maybe the same day or one after the other and waste fewer eggs. Now, there are lots of really new nifty gadgets for egg yolks. Just squishing it back and forth in the shell is one that I have found to be very useful and very easy to do. You can also just run them through your fingers. I've done that. I may end up still doing that. Now, when we're making something that is primarily egg whites, we want to make sure we don't break that yolk and get as much of the yolk away as we can. When it is something relying on the egg yolks, we're in luck. A little bit of egg white walking along is not such a problem. And the eggs, along with your butter and your milk, you want as close to room temperature as you can. Again, they combine a little bit better, as we can see with the beautifully blended creamed butter and sugar. All right, one last one. And there are multiple recipes to make eggless cakes. And they rely on different binders, and there are different styles of cakes. Eggs are were not always available all year round. And they also change in quality, depending on the year, the time of the year. What do those hens have to eat? Are you feeding them? Are they going out and foraging? And again, a hen that is outside eating grass and bugs and whatever it can find has a brighter yolk. It's a healthier yolk. It's a happier chicken. A chicken that is inside eating primarily grain and whatever you can get at the egg store, it is a paler yolk. It's not as happy a hen. And you have to be careful with them. You want to make sure they get enough calcium. They will turn on each other. They will eat their own eggs. They'll eat each other's eggs. So you have to, again, outside if they're running around, they're generally happier. When we began industrial farming in the 40s and 50s, we kind of moved away from some of those things. This is where you see debeaking begin. This is where you see combs being cut because you have too many chickens in one little spot. What's good for the chicken in the long run is good for us. And then you have good cake. I like cake. You may have noticed. All right, so who wants to beat up my egg yolks? All right. So they need to be thick and lemony in color.
So where's the egg beater?
Ah, you want to put
I
the
did.
egg beater?
No. Be funny.
Okay, it's right here.
No. I prefer this.
I'm sorry?
I prefer this myself.
It works really well.
It does.
Come on in.
Come on in.
Sure.
Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Please have a seat.
Anybody take this place?
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look. Is that thick? I think that looks good.
I've seen different stuff.
I got it. Thank you. Yep. Thick and light lemony in color. So it looks like a bright lemon. A little bit thicker. Good, nice and thick. Doesn't quite look like egg yolks anymore. It looks more like a custard. And again, in doing the research, what did a whisk look like? There are a lot of neat looking whisks, but most of them look just like this. Our tools and a lot of things haven't changed in those 100 years.
Oh, I forgot your camera.
All right, so beauteous. All right, so let's get this mixed up together.
You need some feedback for quick recap?
Thank you.
Oh,
Recap.
we're baking cake.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Good.
So what we have done, we have creamed our butter and sugar. So that is ready for us. We have blended our flour and baking, the baking soda and the cream of tartar. They are blended and ready. And we have the most beautifully beaten up egg yolks. These are whipped and ready. So now, and we've also mixed our milk and our vanilla. So now the fun part is we get to blend it all together and make a cake. So, now we want to add, the first step is to add our yolks to our butter mix. Now I've made this cake 3 times, but I'm always checking my directions because, again, the day you don't check directions is the day that you don't put in the baking powder. And that is the day when your chocolate chip cookies do not rise. So, we'll add in our yolks. Have a sip of water. And we do have lemonade and cookies if you're also feeling equally parched.
No, not right now.
All right, so the beautiful egg yolks are going to go in all at once. Now this lovely doodad is today's anachronism. The rubber spatula doesn't come along until the 1930s. However, my wooden spatula did not come along at all. So most spatulas you would use either a flat wooden spatula or again your wooden spoon. Today I must beg your forgiveness for my rubber spatula. Now I am assuming that in your own homes, when you make these cakes, Christmas is a lovely time to make cake, you will use your modern tools, and you'll see that the directions are written for those modern tools. A handheld cake mixer is very useful. Stand mixer is also useful depending on the size of your bowl. If your bowl is very large, you're going to have to scrape more at the bottom of that to make sure everything combines. The hand mixer, obviously that's not an issue in that way. So we're going to mix in, we're going to combine our egg yolks and our butter mixture, which is one of the reasons why we creamed it to start with, so that it would combine nicely.
No.
Ah! I have milk.
No.
All right, please do not cry, we've spilled milk. I know that it's a concern, but let's not cry over it. We're going to set this to the side for the moment. We're going to set this to the side for the moment. And perhaps add a little bit more along the way. Please forgive me.
Oh, the table shook and that's why that was spoke.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I got it. I couldn't figure out what was going on.
I was klutzy.
You're forgiven.
I am thank you. I am blending in the egg yolks and the butter mixture. And in doing so, I shook the table just slightly. All right. Nicely blended, lovely yellow. And this is where we're going to add that flour and milk mixture in 3 parts. Use my anachronism, make sure everything is all scooped together. All right. We're going to add 1/3 of our flour mix. can see him blending it in. So this is gonna be a lot of mixing and blending. So while I am doing that, what can I answer for you?
I guess I won't wait until the end. Will the salts in the sodas and the baking powder, is that the only salt that goes into the recipe?
For this recipe, yes.
Okay.
That's the only salt. Some more modern recipes will have some salt to them. I'm just gonna top off our wobbly milk. So I'm gonna add about a third of my mix. Salt adds flavor. In yeast products, it helps to keep the yeast in check. It helps with some of the texture of the food. Now, you have made cakes from scratch. Have you made them without the electric mixer?
Mhm.
So we've got a third of the milk, a third of the flour. Still pretty easy to mix at the moment. So let's make it a little harder. Another third of flour is going in. And with the mixing, you can see in the Buckeye directions, she recommends not just stirring in the circular, but to go underneath our mix and come up. And so the cake mix. And that goes back to making it lighter, less dense, and it helps to develop the flour, very much like when you're kneading bread. You're helping to develop the glutens and the other parts of the bread. Cake flour is a higher protein flour. It is more finely ground and more highly sifted. You can use any flour to make cake. I have found cake flour is cake flour for a reason. So we'll add a little bit more of our milk. Now, one of the reasons those box mixes that I'm picking on today, we have powdered eggs, we have powdered milk, and there is some way of including fats into these mixes without them separating or going rancid. And the first cake mixes that were released in the 1920s or 1930s, I'm trying to remember which decade it was, they were a complete marketing failure. Nobody wanted them. And they were pretty sure that cake mixes were going to go off the shelf. Why would you possibly want a cake mix when you can make a cake so easily at home? Easily at home. And part of it, they realized people didn't feel like they were actually baking. If I'm adding water, stirring it up, sticking it in the oven. How is that baking? And that is why you add butter and eggs to cake mixes. It is a marketing tool so that you feel that you are baking. Yep. This is why you can buy pancake batter, pancake mix, that is just add water. Pancakes early in the morning when the nieces and nephews are there saying, I want food now. I'm okay with adding just a bit of water and getting them on the griddle. But if I'm making you a special cake, I want to take some time to make you a special cake. Marketers know us so well, don't they? So all of my flour mix is now gone in. And And I am giving it a good mix. Again, going underneath, coming up, not flinging it across the table. This table and I are on shaky ground. And then the last of our milk going on in. So as I stir in the last of the milk, what can I answer?
Some recipes, not necessarily historical ones, call for adding the egg, white in particular, last.
Yes.
What, it seems to make whatever it is lighter, but have you done that with cakes?
Yes.
Okay.
The white cake, and then in angel food and in some of the others, especially when you'll find that you need to whip those egg whites, generally to a stiff peak. And that's when you whip them, if anyone else isn't familiar with the term, you're whipping them so that they look first like whipped cream, and then they look like whipped ice cream. And so when you bring the mixer away, the spoon away, it stands on its own. That is a stiff peak. And then you fold that stiffened egg into the cake mix. That helps to make it rise. Going back before there were our chemical leaveners here, yeast or egg whites is how you lifted a cake. And so you're adding it last so you don't deflate those stiffed peaks. And it will rise more easily. It'll rise at all.
Okay, I got a question.
Yes.
It's not about what you're doing, but
Yes.
our granddaughter just introduced us to a Amish white bread,
Okay.
and she made it herself, and she sent us the recipe. We haven't made it yet, but it tastes like a bread that's close to being cakey,
Mhm.
and it's the best bread I've ever had in my life.
Oh, good.
And I just wonder if you've ever heard of it.
That recipe I'd have to look at. My guess is that it has milk in it. Very often, no?
I made it with her last week.
Okay, so no milk.
It's
No
just-
milk.
It's out of this world.
No milk.
Okay.
I have a question too, which
Yes.
is in colonial times, did they have baking powder? I don't think so.
No, no. They were using pearl ash, which is something that you are burning a hardwood down to a very fine ash. There's a specific type of hardwood, which unfortunately the name has eluded me. You would burn that and hang on to those ashes. The chemical composition of that particular ash is called pearl ash. You would use that in place of the cream of tartar or the baking soda. Or you would use a residue in a wine bottle. Not a wine bottle, forgive me, in the wine barrels. And this is when the wine's drained out, there's like a crystalline mix left behind. This isn't the mother, the ferment. This is hard like a salt. And you would use that residue from there. In fact, some of the recipes that I went through, they would either give it its proper name, which again eludes me, or it would say this particular residue from the wine bottle, use this much from the wine cask. And that was the forerunner of cream of tartar. And so they refined that, and the cream of tartar comes onto the scene around the 1880s. They were probably using it in the 1870s, but around the 1880s is when you see it in the recipe books. And then the baking powder, which includes some cream of tartar, that comes onto the scene in the 1890s. And this particular brand, you'll still see it on your shelf. The label looks very similar. This was a very popular one. There were several types. This is KC baking powder, and you could get this down at the pharmacy at the drugstore. And they called it the baking soda, baking powder wars. Evidently, there were some gentlemen in New England who were very serious about what you were going to buy and keep in your kitchen. All right, so we have our mixed up cake. Now at home, when you use your electric mixer, I suggest running it for about 2 minutes on high. And again, you're incorporating as much air as possible into your cake. And it helps make it a little bit lighter.
seen at that stage, the bowl actually ends up here and it's peaked, so it pops as it's being eaten.
It is a skill I have yet to develop.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this a skill you have? No, not today? All right.
You like it.
That's one, I think Clabber Girl, isn't it, Bacon?
Yeah,
Yes.
Clabber Girl.
Clabber Girl is another one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's one of the older brands too.
Yes, it is.
Can I share something? It says baking powder contains baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, and a dry acid, cream of tartar, or sodium aluminum sulfate. When liquid is added to a baking recipe, these two ingredients react to form bubbles of carbon dioxide gas.
Yep, and that is what lifts the cake. That's the chemical reaction.
Okay.
Now, prior to these wonderful chemicals in our cupboards, chemistry is very important. This is chemistry I understand. We won't talk about the chemistry I got on my Regents degrees. But what you're saying, it is that chemical reaction, releasing the gases, helping it to rise. Prior to that, the egg whites trapped air, and so they were using the air to help it rise. And if you were using yeast, like I mentioned a little while ago, election day cake is a yeast-baked cake, and so you've got the fermentation of the yeast helping it to rise. So all of these things, cake, especially as a celebratory food, is recorded all the way back to Roman times. They were sweetening theirs with honey, which there are still, you can find honey-based recipes. Honey browns differently than sugar does. There are other types of cakes. Almost every culture has had some kind of cake. It's been different in different ways, depending on their resources, their recipes. All right. So we're going to put this into our pan. Now I have, in the recipe I shared with you, I suggest 2 8-inch round pans. This one is a 9-inch, so I'm going to put it just into the 9-inch. But 2 8-inch round pans, and you're filling them about halfway. And it'll seem like there isn't enough there. The yellow cake rises quite a bit. Comes out beautifully. I never turned on the oven.
What do you want it on?
375, please.
I'm gonna assume I would need the oven.
Well, you've got time to stay with us while this bakes, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. We haven't seen the tour yet.
Oh, good. Have you been to the house before?
No,
This for-
Oh, wonderful.
we drive by here all the time. And one day I decided last week to look up when you were open, because you're closed mostly. And second Saturday, this is second Saturday, here we are.
Wonderful. I'm so pleased you joined us. I was so excited you were coming. I baked a cake.
Yeah, well, so if we stay long enough, we get to find out if it's any good.
All right. Well, I'm going to be just a moment while I go set this in the oven. Jan's going to give you just a moment's history of the house.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a kitchen here in the house as we've redone the house, but initially there is a summer kitchen outside that does have an oven out there. So they would have not been baking when the house was initially built. They would not have been baking in the house. In the summertime especially, the heat would really be not a good idea, and also with a lot of the smells and things from meats and everything, they would keep that a little distance away from the house.
So this house predates the Civil War, is that the idea?
Yes, 1820.
1820.
When they bought the property in the early 1800s, there was a log cabin a couple hundred yards over here, and the first Thomas Benson that lived here, he was married and had 2 sons and 2 daughters, Anne and Elizabeth, and Joseph and Basil. And when we go in the other room, you'll see we'd see their photographs and the painting on the wall. When his wife passed away fairly young, he never remarried, which was kind of unusual for having 4 children. But when he built this house, it was just 4 rooms. It was the parlor, the dining room and the 2 rooms above. And then later on, when his son inherited the house, he's the one who expanded to what we consider 2.5 stories, because he had 12 children. And he just had to keep adding on as more kids arrived.
And look at this, it bakes so quickly.
That's smart.
Isn't that wonderful?
Alright, so,
Martha
Maybe
Stewart
just
doesn't have
right
anything on you.
now, Martha Stewart has a little bit on me because this is a cake making lecture, not a frosting making lecture. So we have,
My fingers.
But
Those
cake,
are-
good cake is good cake
That's right.
without frosting.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
true.
well,
And we
I
always,
mean,
we
frosting's
always
okay, but I
had,
like the
always had
regular
the
cake.
pound cake.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
now-
No, always make a little sampler. Had to
Yeah.
make a little sampler.
Yeah.
well
on the
now
side,
then
yeah.
I would like to know, would you like frosting on your cake?
Yes.
Or would,
Yes.
well, the gentleman was very quick with his answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Alright,
I'm a sweet addict.
oh, are you, sir? Alright, well, we will do that.
Let's see.
Mom does give the little samples for us.
So we're gonna
Yeah, we did too.
put a little bit of frosting on our cake. Now, I had hoped to bring you a nice homemade frosting, but I think I'm gonna save that for another day.
You
Because,
just put it in that container, right?
That's right. She made it and we recycled the container.
of course, reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yeah, her husband expects her to work for a living.
Well, you know, I need to keep him in the style he's accustomed to.
That's right.
You both work for the Anne Arundel County Historical Society, is that the idea?
We volunteer, yeah.
Volunteer?
Yes.
Okay. And
Yeah.
how many, throughout the whole county, are there any other places like this?
Not that we take care of. This is our
Do they have-
project.
Do they have other properties like?
We have the library, the Keithy Library on, which is a historical building over on Crane Highway in Glen Burnie, that
I know
the
where that is.
Anne Arundel Genealogical Society and the Historical Society run jointly as a volunteer operation
Can
also.
you time 20 minutes for me?
And we also have a little gift shop down in Savannah Park. It is at Jones Station
Right, we know
and the
where it is.
BW Trail.
White building?
Yeah,
Yes.
we know about that.
Yeah.
Now
Or B&A Trail,
the
sorry.
Genealogy Society's headquarters is where?
The Genealogical Society
Genealogical
is the library, is their headquarters.
That's Keithy Library.
Yes, and the Historical Society, officially, this is our headquarters,
Mhm.
but, they keep a lot of their information at the library also.
When is the Keithy Library open?
Thursday, Friday, Saturday from 10 to 4.
And I
It's
have
an interesting
used,
place to go to.
I have used
Yeah.
Keithy Library for research,
Mhm.
and it is fabulous.
It is.
For local families, things that I never thought I would come across. This has been the repository for every bit of local history. Local churches, when they don't need their records any longer, have donated it to Keithy.
But it's also good for anything really along the East Coast. We've got records down in Kentucky and up in Pennsylvania, New England, Connecticut. But you want to check our website for the schedule because the Glen Burnie Carnival is the end of this month
Right.
and we will be closed for a short period of time.
Are those
That-
cakes different flavors?
Yes, so the one that I just completed up on the cake stand, that is the yellow cake we were just baking. And the one that I am putting a little bit of frosting on the top, this is the white cake. And this is the other cake in the recipe book that you were holding. And this one, is similar to a sponge cake.
Mm.
And also at the Keithy Library, you have access to Ancestry and those other, so that you can, yeah. that's
Yeah, we
something
have
that you-
volunteer researchers there to help you.
I think I recall, when I was a very young kid, that I took art lessons, painting, wood painting.
Downstairs?
Downstairs,
Yeah.
and it was the Maryland Institute of Art, I've got the name wrong for the Institute of Art, but it's the famous one in Baltimore.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
had a-
Maryland Institute College of Art, Micah.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
had a class and that's when I started really blossoming with, I'm not an artist, but that's when I
enjoying it.
Really enjoying it blossoming.
Yeah.
Yeah, brings
If you
back
wanna
memories.
travel down to Annapolis, there's some 13 properties that I can think of that are similar to this property. There's the, Hammond Harwood House. There's the, what's the big one?
Baker.
Thank you, the William Baker House. There's
Yeah,
the
but
Rice
those
House.
aren't- those
There's
aren't
the Rice
us.
House.
Those are not us, those are.
No.
But
I
that's
said
historic
if you want
Annapolis
to
that-
join it
yeah,
down to
exactly.
Annapolis, this is the Historical Society of Anne Arundel County.
Right.
So in reality,
It's part of all.
it's all
that.
being supported by our tax dollars.
Gotcha.
Yeah, okay.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's the point I bring up, because that's important.
Yeah.
You know, it's not to be broken up.
Yeah, we are an all-volunteer organization and we subsist on donations.
And all of us in here are volunteers, in
That's
one
right.
way and in multiple areas.
Thank you.
So we have 2 types of cake for you to try.
Welcome to join us.
I'm thinking about making a donation.
Well, thank you.
That's wonderful.
So we have 2 types for you to try. You can try both, you can have one, it is up to you, but let us celebrate and have some cake.